This is double stuff, Spicy Doodles. And Spicy wants a little bit of personal time today. How you doing, huh? I know. Okay, I'm going to put your little feetsies down here on my... So that I can do that, huh? It's like one of your favorite things. Okay. So this is Spicy Doodles. And Spicy Doodles, also known as double stuff, is a little overweight. So lifting doodles is kind of like bodybuilding. Okay, let's see here. There. Okay, hey, you know what I wanted to talk about today? I wanted to talk about trauma and how we deal with that in the body. I know that most of the time we look at trauma and we go, oh, it all happens in our head and it's something psychological, and it's all psychological. Yet in Chinese medicine, it's not all psychological. The body is a big player in helping us deal with trauma and helping us sort through trauma and keeping us here. And I think when I started studying some of the different channels, and we're going to talk about the Luo Collaterals today, that's when I really became aware that the body, it's not just this thing that we use to get around in this world. The body is really our tool to make sure that we stay in this world. And, you know, what it does for us is, oh, are you ready to get down? Okay, I'll put you down. You ready? Let me put you down. Okay, gotta watch. Gotta be careful here because I might throw my back out. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Double stuff. Oh. I think someone's giving treats upstairs. So yeah, double stuff has super hearing when it comes to food. So we're talking about trauma. And I think one of the things that was really interesting, or that was really fascinating for me, is when I started looking at some of the different channels in Chinese medicine. So not just the primary channels, you know, the 12 that we're so familiar with and we know so much about: the lungs, the heart, the liver, the stomach, the spleen, you know, all of those. Yeah, that's part of it. But there's these different channel systems, and we're going to talk about the Luo Collateral systems. But when I started looking at those channels, it really became apparent that our body, we think of our body as something that just gets us around in this world. And when we think about trauma, we think that it's all this psychological stuff that just happens in the head. And what I found is that the body is necessary to help us integrate and deal with all our experiences. It's this tool that helps us stay alive and in this world. We have a tendency to think of the body as very separate from ourselves, from our psychology, from our mental and emotional issues. And how we deal with medicine, it's the exact same. They very much like keeping the physical body very separate from your spiritual, your emotional, and your mental body. And, you know, when I was growing up, the one thing that I heard when you went to work, leave your personal issues at the door. So they very much thought that you could separate the body from the rest of you. And what I find is that's not really true. The body is how we are able to stay here in this life and how we're able to integrate everything. And the minute that we can't do that, the minute that we disallow that, that's where we start creating disease, and that's where we start creating our own death. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about trauma. One of the types of trauma that we're more familiar with today is bullying. That becomes a really big deal today. That's going to be an easy one to talk about trauma. You know what? In the episode, Our Diet, Ourselves, Our Spirituality, in that episode, I talk about trauma, but I talk about how generational trauma gets mapped into the body. So how our trauma from our family of origin gets mapped into the body. So there's one type of trauma. So now I'm going to talk about another type of trauma. And this is trauma that's very external to ourselves that happens when we're interacting in the environment. And I'm going to use the example of bullying because we're all familiar with that. And we all have experienced that from different degrees and different levels. Here's the thing that kind of struck me about trauma. And this is why I was kind of questioning trauma, because I was wondering, how does trauma get stuck in the body? How does it get stuck in our psyche? And, what makes it stick? Why doesn't it just run out of us like water? So why isn't it, when we run into these experiences, why doesn't it just flow through us and go away? Why does it stick? It's years and decades after your emotional abuse has stopped or the situation has stopped, and you are still responding and acting from that trauma. So it not only sticks, it gets entrenched in your reactions and your responses to the world. And could that all just be a psychological issue, or is there something more to that? It seems like our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, they're very spiritual and that there's not much substance to them. So is there something more to why this stuff seems so entrenched in us? How does your body deal with trauma? And here's the thing that I thought was really interesting. This is where I think that we start talking about how things get entrenched, because, the only way you can experience this life is through your body. So your body is really this tool that allowed you to participate and to interact with this world. And so it's only through this that you can interact. And it's only while the body is functioning that you can be here interacting. Does that give you some idea of why this body, it's not separate from our mental attitude, our emotions and everything? It's our interaction to this world. And so how we are able to stay alive is really partly controlled by how our body handles trauma. How does our body handle trauma? What are the Luo Collaterals? Well, let's first look at where they're located. So you have your skin, right? And that's your first line of defense against external pathogens like bacteria and viruses. And in Chinese medicine, they call that the Wei level. So that's your first line of defense. And right underneath that, close to the surface, is these Luo Collaterals. And these Luo Collaterals sit between our skin and our primary channels. And you know about the primary channels because those are the 12 channels that we hear about all the time. They're the spleen, the stomach, the heart, the liver, the lungs. They're the ones that you usually go to acupuncture for. So what is unique about the Luo Collaterals? Well, what's unique about the Luo Collaterals is they help us deal with emotions and a specific type of emotion. They help us deal with emotions that are overwhelming and that we just can't process at that point in time. And you've had those days where you're overwhelmed and you're just like, everybody, please just stop. That is the type of emotions that they help us deal with. And one of the most common type of emotions is going to be trauma. Trauma is overwhelming at that point in time, and our body just cannot handle it. What it does is it uses these Luo Collaterals to take that emotion that we can't process at this point in time, and it stores it. So these Luo Collaterals, they're like a warehouse in our body, and how it stores it is it stores it in the blood. And have you ever heard those stories about people who get transfusions and they're like, I have all these memories that have nothing to do with me? That's storing memories and emotions in the blood. So it seems like it does happen. And in Chinese medicine, they say that here's the way that you can take those emotions that are overwhelming at this exact moment and put them someplace so that you can deal with them at a later date or a later time. And what's another way of looking at how the body helps us deal with times when we're dealing with excess? One of the most common excess themes that we have here in the United States is overeating, right? I think, how many of us are obese now? It's something insane, like 60%. And so overeating is a really big issue here in the West. And what does the body do? Well, the body's going to help you when you overeat by taking that excess nutrition that it can't use, can't get rid of at this time, and taking it and storing it in different places in your body. So storing it in fat cells. And why is that important? Well, if the body didn't do that, if you overate and the body said, oh, that's more than I need, I'm just going to leave it here in the stomach and the intestines, that would be a huge problem, right? Because we wouldn't live very long. So this body has all these defenses to help us survive what we do to it or what happens to us. And one of the things that happens to us is our experiences with the external world. And whenever they become overwhelming or too much, the Luo Collaterals help take that emotion and help us store it someplace. So think about the last time that you were overwhelmed, that just too much was happening and you needed everybody to just stop and you needed everybody to get out of your head. And whatever that is for you, if it's you going out and working on a car, or you going for a walk, or you going for a drink, if you don't do that and you're stuck with that emotion in your head, and the next day comes and that same situation happens again, and you're stuck with more of that emotion in your head, you would eventually just break down. You would probably break down by day number 3 if there was no way for you to offload some of these emotions so that you could decompress. That's where the Luo Collaterals come in. They store it in the blood and they act like a warehouse between the surface and between the primary channels. Now, why I like looking at the expression of bullying is because most of us have experienced that at some point in time in our life. So we all know how to be on the receiving end and how to be on the giving end of being a bully. And today it seems like it's really taken a whole new level and a whole new level of sophistication. And if we look at it from a Luo Collateral perspective, what happens when we get bullied is, maybe the first day we're like, yeah, whatever. Maybe the second day we're like, yeah, whatever. But, a week into it, 2 weeks into it, it's going to start grinding on us and we're going to start getting confused. We're going to start feeling very alone. We're going to start feeling very vulnerable. We're not going to understand why we're being picked on. And it's that level of confusion that we're not going to be able to process, and we need to shunt, or we need to store that emotion someplace else until we can address that. And that is where those Luo Collaterals come in. We store them in the blood and they act like a warehouse. What happens when you've been storing them in the warehouse and the warehouse is getting full? Well, then you're going to start seeing the emotions come up onto your skin. What are some of the ways that can happen? Well, let's think about when we were a teenager. Acne. That came in at this 5-year period of time in our life when our hormones turned on. And suddenly our hormones were talking to us and telling us what to do and forcing us into certain behaviors. I mean, you're almost out of control as a teenager with hormones. It's like, what the heck was that? And then all of a sudden you're interacting with people from a totally new level. You're really trying to find yourself. It gets really overwhelming, and you see a lot of acne in teenagers. So there's one way that you see being overwhelmed with emotions, how that will show up on the body. If you can take the time to process through these emotions while they're still in the Luo Collaterals, so while they're still really surface, before they start sinking into deeper levels of your body, like the primaries, or even deeper than that, then the trauma will flow away like water. Yet, if you don't have the time to deal with them, or it's just too overwhelming, or if it's too repetitive, when they're in the low collaterals, it will start sinking into a deeper level of your body. And that makes me think, I have a client and they're in college. And one of the things they said that was really amazing to me is when they were growing up, their teachers said, bullying builds character. And I was thinking about that because, oh, doesn't that sound like something my boomer generation would have said? And I know it is because I just remember growing up and the thought was that suck it up. That was the big thing that I grew up with, suck it up. Yeah, that was horrible. Suck it up. So I don't think that bullying builds character. What I know now is that bullying creates trauma that we map onto our body, which we map onto our psyche, and which affects every one of our emotional responses with the world from that point forward. Now, just saying that sounds like that's the end of the world. And it sounds like, wow, so this trauma gets mapped onto our body and we're just stuck with that. And so all we get to do is try and figure out how to survive bullying and then spend the rest of our life trying to reparent ourselves so that we don't do it to other people. And I don't think it's that limiting either. I don't think, just like I don't think that bullying builds character, there's this concept of this experience was part of your experience and you have a choice what you're going to do with that. So every one of us has choice, so which is free will. And choice in Chinese medicine is called zhi. It comes off the kidney and it's our determination of how we are going to move forward. And we could move forward and get stuck in being a victim and get stuck in our life being just this box that was created for us through our interactions with kids in high school or bosses at work or whatever it was. Or we could make a choice to become part of that solution. I think that at this time, we are going through a huge change. I think everybody feels it. There's this massive change going on right now. It's a type of evolution. It's an evolution of thought and interaction with the world. And what we know about evolution is that it doesn't end. Our species just doesn't end. And if it doesn't end, if it doesn't just suddenly stop, then it's our choice on if we're going to become part of the solution. However, we're going to respond to this for the rest of our lives is a personal decision. We will either allow our body to create that shell that limits our vision and our ability to interact with the world, or we're going to try to find a way to change how we interact with the world. So part of being human is going to be about change, and it's going to be about evolution and creating a bigger and better life. So every time the human species is about to make a major evolutionary leap, it requires outside of the box thinking. And it requires that you do something that you've never done before. So when I look at this, as our planet becomes more and more populated, in order to make it to that next step, our evolution can only go one way. Individuals are going to have to learn how to collaborate with each other. The issue of competition, and with competition does come the concept of bullying, because competition is about being better than somebody else or being worse than somebody else. And that's where the the idea of bullying is I'm better than you, or you're worse than me, or I'm worse than you, you're better than me. So that's that whole competition thing with bullying. So part of this change may be trying to figure out how to address bullying from a different perspective. And that may be helping to empower people to find a safe space to communicate and to give them an opportunity to unravel their own emotions and learn skills of working and leaning on each other, and learn skills to understand how to show compassion, how to take ownership, and how to feel safe enough to communicate. And this is where compassion, outside the box thinking, can help rescue our kids at a much younger age and help rescue them before they've lived a life trapped in a vision of a world that contains this limiting belief of being a victim. That brings me to this next part of this episode where I'm really excited, where I get to talk to somebody who spent her whole life helping kids learn how to work with the issue of bullying. I am out here speaking with Vicki Abadesco, and Vicki has a organization called Soul Shoppe that works with bullying. Now, Vicki, she's an internationally recognized leader in the field of social emotional learning, anti-bullying, and she creates a more empathy-based world, which we all need that today. So she brings over 30 years of experience teaching life skills and conflict resolution. She is a facilitator, an educator, a speaker, and she is the author of a number of books. One is Free to Be, which is untold stories of going beyond bullying. She's a co-author of Cool Tools for Schools and The Empty Balloon. Vicki's also a fellow of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT, and she's a co-founder of Soul Shoppe that they founded in 2000. So, hi, Vicki. How are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you today.
Thank you so much for coming out and talking with us. Hey, Vicki, what is this Dalai Lama MIT thing?
Yeah, the Dalai Lama has a few places where his name is attached to particular institutions. And so, when we think about ethics or how we do things, right, the Dalai Lama is really wanting to infuse care and compassion in more different ways. And so when the folks at MIT heard about the work that we were doing, they have a rolling fellowship where different folks are highlighted every single year. And so years ago, they chose our organization, Soul Shoppe, and the work that we do.
What a great honor to be realized and recognized in that fashion.
I love this connection that you're making between trauma and bullying. And I think that, right, I think there's a great connection. Like so many of us, when we think about the trauma work that we do as adults, why do we have trauma? And sure, there's things that, there's something traumatic as an adult that I can experience today or experienced yesterday. And for many of us, when we talk about our healing and wanting to transform our trauma, many of us have visions and experiences from our childhood. Right? We're wanting to unlearn something. We're trying to move something. A lot of the healing work that you probably do with people around their trauma is something that's been embedded in their somatic being. And it's embedded there because, or from very early ages. And so we work with elementary students And part of that work is looking at, oh, yes, we talk about trauma, but for a kid, they don't, that those aren't part of the language they use. They just know that they were hurt, right? Something is
Yeah.
painful, something hurts. And even those words, they don't have the language for. So when we're talking about something like bullying, bullying can be very traumatic, whether we're kids or whether we're adults.
It's
Right? And
very traumatic.
it can be very and the one book, the Free to Be book, that is about untold stories of bullying. I spoke to ages 8 to, I believe, 86 or 76 was the oldest person. And so all of these folks from very young to very old, right, had these stories stayed with them about ways, the hurt and harm that was caused through specific kinds of bullying, whether it was verbal bullying, whether it was physical bullying, whether it was emotional or social bullying. Right. So there, again, like you're saying, there's all of these nuances. And to me, there's a bigger picture of, wow, look at all the ways we've learned to hurt each other.
That is so amazing, Vicki, because that's true. Oh, okay. So how do you see because I do see it in clinic. I see it all the time. Almost everything that we deal with, all our limitations in life, all our responses in life come from these initial hurts that we haven't really been able to incorporate into our psyche. It's gone to a really different level.
Yeah, social media, right? Like the way our world has really changed, right? So bullying has changed with it. And, at Soul Shoppe, we say this very sometimes controversial thing that there is no such thing as a bully.
I wanted to start asking you about that because, okay, why don't you tell me what you think of bullies?
Yeah, so I think if we were to look at, again, here we are in an elementary school, and, I share this story about, many times schools call us and say, we have a problem with bullying. Can you come in and fix this problem? And so we know that it's not, a bully problem. Is it really about the bully? And especially when we're talking about an elementary school, right? So if I have a principal that says, hey, we have this kid that's ruining the playground, they're a bully. And, we're talking about, again, a 6, 7, 8-year-old child. And so what, again, has this child learned inside of the behavior that creates chaos on the playground, right? No child is born and like, woohoo, I'm going to raise the biggest, baddest bully ever, right? No kid is born saying, I want to be a bully. It's not how it works, right? So we learn. Bullies learn to be bullies. But who are they really? Right? They're kids who have big feelings and big needs that they don't actually know how to ask for the help that they really need. They don't have the language, isn't developed yet for that, right? Or they haven't learned that choice along their way. Right. So we talk about any kind of trauma, or including bullying, right? It's like, what are we really trying to heal? What are we really trying to get at? What's the real root of bullying? Right? Getting underneath where the hurt, the exclusion, the pain, the isolation, the sorrow, the grief, the anger, the rage, right? We have a lot of kids. There's a lot of people raging and angry right now. And how do we be with that? Right? And without calling a kid a bully, without throwing kid things around and they're pushing. I want to know why. Why are you angry? Let's not bench them, put them on suspension, send them home, because then they don't really get to have the expression, right? And how do we help each other have healthy expression of our feelings so that we don't feel like we have to go and terrorize the playground or push people away?
That is really amazing because, the other thing is to have a place where you can actually express your emotions. So it would seem if they had an opportunity to find a safe place to start learning that it's okay to express hurt, that it's okay to express feeling alone and isolated, that you're in a safe place and somebody is not going to bully you or harass you or tease you because you're feeling hurt. I think that would be super positive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And in the book, The Empty Balloon Book, right, we just talk about how we even use a metaphor of balloon and that all of us have an emotional balloon. And in that balloon is where we put our feelings we don't know what to do with. So when we feel scared or when we feel grief or sorrow or anger, and we don't feel like we can have an expression, we put it right all in this balloon. So we go through life, right? We in the classroom, we answer the question not correctly, everyone laughs, we feel embarrassed. You can't do anything with that. So it goes in the balloon, right? Something else happens. We trip down the hall. Again, more laughter. I'm now really mad at myself and everyone else. Put that in the balloon, right? So the balloon just gets bigger and bigger. And if we don't know what to do with those feelings, we don't have a healthy way to let that balloon out, let some of those, that the fullness of that balloon out, then we start to leak, right? We start to hurt ourselves and we hurt each other because it just needs to relieve some of that pressure that we feel, right? And that's when bullying occurs. That's when we turn to alcohol. That's when we turn to other behaviors that, again, don't really help us. They hurt us or they hurt or harm someone else, right? It's like when, we get sharp with somebody else or impatient or might say something or shut somebody out or again, right? That's not really what we want, right? In those moments, we really need connection. We want understanding. We want care and compassion. And, right, our balloon is so full, right? It's like, we don't know. So we do these things. Right. So, right, how to have a better understanding of our feelings and what our needs are. It's funny, I'm just sitting here, I have this poster here, we do with the kids, right, to help them understand, right? Nice. What are you feeling? And again, right, we need language development because it isn't in our language development to say, I feel lonely.
I love the faces.
Yeah. And I need support or I need care or right. How do we really ask so that you can support me and to get the thing that I want?
Oh my gosh, that is so positive. Teaching us how to communicate with each other in a supportive manner. That is so positive.
All of those tools, right? Or a pathway to healing, right? Our trauma to, right? Many of us are bullies because we have full balloons that we don't know what to do with, right? Or have bullying behavior. So right,
I got two questions for you. Yeah. Okay, so bullying behavior. As people age and they've adopted these behaviors, unbeknownst to them, they're totally unaware that these are their behaviors. This is just what they know. How bullying is usually something that happens almost unconsciously in people's heads. And, as you become an adult, you become super effective at it. But how do you work with kids so that they feel safe in acknowledging some of this stuff? I mean, that's pretty scary to have to acknowledge something like that, to acknowledge that you might be hurting somebody else, because I don't care who you are. I don't think anybody wants to really consciously believe they're hurting somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll have two quick stories I can share.
Okay.
So one is, first off, you're right. When we go in and we talk about bullying in, with schools, we kind of will talk about this is verbal, this is emotional, this is what it looks like, it sounds like. And the kids are so curious. And oftentimes we'll have a kid that says, I think that's me, like out of like pure innocence.
Right? Oh my gosh, that is so positive.
And then we give the kids an opportunity to clean it up, right? To make an apology. And so, I can remember one time a fifth grader stood up, and again, right, there's a particular frame in which we do a cleanup and an apology. And, fifth grader stood up and he asked another student if he could stand up because he wanted to offer an apology. And that student agreed to receive the apology. And this kid just said, I just realized that I have been bullying you since we've been in kindergarten.
Oh my gosh. That
And
just
so there's
brings
just
chills.
something, right? So when the level of courage that kids have to say, oh, so this is really speaking to what you were just saying, Kim, right? Like a behavior
Right.
just occurs. I'm just like, I tease you, I call you this name. We've been doing it since kindergarten. It's no big deal. But yet on the other side, right, the young person gets to say, yeah, people have been calling me this name. I don't like it, right?
Oh my
I
gosh.
feel angry. I need respect, right? So they get
Oh,
to say
wow.
that. And then the kids get to respond and say like, oh yeah, I've been doing that thing and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I promise I won't do it again. So something gets to change, right? And in that moment, something's possible. And oftentimes with bullying or sometimes any trauma that we have, we actually are so locked in, we don't actually think it's possible. We don't think forgiveness is possible. There's a lot of ways that many of us have people in our lives that maybe aren't even here anymore. And we wish that we would hear an apology from them, right?
Or that you could give an
Or
apology
that you
to
could
them.
give an apology.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And then another quick story I'll just share is, we
Good.
did get this call from a principal who said they had, bully some kid who was terrorizing the playground. We go in, we're doing our free to be assembly with them. And we do ask this question, like, so who has a really full balloon? Right. And so, kids will raise their hands and, we see the sea of hands and we're like, well, who would like to talk about what's in their full balloon? And so then the kids, right, their little hands, right, everyone's kind of silent. They're not quite sure who wants to share. And then in the back, we see this little girl raise her hand. So we say, please, come on up. So she sits in the chair and we sit down next to her and we say, tell us, what's in your balloon? And so at this moment, we can tell this is the bully that the principal told us about that was terrorizing the playground.
Oh,
So
she's a
here's
little girl.
this 9-year-old sweet little girl sitting in this chair who's been a terror, right? Terrorizing. So then we say, the whole room is silent because they know this is the kid. So we say, what is in your balloon? And this sweet little girl started to have a little tear down her face. And she starts crying. And everyone's really quiet now. So like over 100 kids in this auditorium. And she's like, I lost my best friend.
What?
Yeah. And nobody understood what she was saying. And we're like, well, tell us what happened. And then she says, my grandmother died.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
So here we have this sweet little girl, right, who's been called a terror on the playground, who lost the dearest person in her life. And there was nowhere for her to talk about that. There was nowhere for her to explain it, right? Because again, these big feelings,
yeah.
what do we do with these big feelings? We don't know what to do with them, right? So what does she do? She goes out on the playground and she ruins the Foursquare game. She pushes somebody around. She calls people a name. And then what do? They've suspended her 3 times as if that's going to change the behavior, because you're going to send her home to what? Her grandmother who's no longer there anymore. Right. And I will tell you, right, if I was that little kid, I'd also be that mad. So we let her, we asked her what her favorite things were that she did with her grandmother. What were her favorite things? What is she? And she was lightened up to be able to talk about it. So then we asked the entire room, right? If you see her out on the playground and you see her doing things that maybe are not, she's hurting someone or herself, who would be willing to ask her if she wants to talk about her grandma?
Oh my gosh.
Every hand went up. And then we asked her to choose 3 people. She chose 3 people who she would go to. And now this kid who was the bully, labeled a bully, now there's something else that's possible, right? instead of
Vicki,
fear and anger, right? There's compassion and empathy and understanding.
that is bringing me to tears. That is such, both those stories are such beautiful stories. And you're right. I think what is the most beautiful about that is the ability to be honest and to have it received with compassion and empathy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And imagine if we were that way with each other, if all of us were that way with each other.
If we could all relearn these behaviors. One of the things you bring up a really interesting point, because I think if I look at my generation, yeah, we didn't have any of that, please. Empathy. That's yeah, thanks. What was the biggest statement? I grew up in rural America, farming community. And, we would laugh because, you could be a farmer and accidentally chop off your hand, and you were not going to the hospital until you got the day's work done. And then you'd have time to go to the hospital. So yeah, empathy and compassion wasn't our strongest suit in our generation. Sure. And I see that today, with our generation. And then I look at these kids that are like 20 and younger, and how they interact with each other. And there's a level of honesty that I know that we didn't have.
Yeah.
There's a level of honesty and support with each other that I know that my generation just didn't have.
Yeah.
And it's because of work like what you're doing. It's because of work like so many people are doing to help people start accepting differences and emotions. And I mean, we're going to be different every day. And, how do we work through that? How do we find that acceptable? Mm-hmm. When I first went to work, the statement was, leave your emotions at the door. And that's not an acceptable statement today.
That's right.
And it's a real statement, because how do you cut that off? How do you walk in a door and suddenly everything else is gone, and you're just here being a drone at your desk? You can't do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Things are changing, right? And things have been changing. And so and how do we have the balance, right? There's also, right, all of these conversations aren't about also accepting behavior that's hurtful and harmful, right? There's still accountability, there's still acknowledgement, there's still discipline that can happen, right? When again, we hurt or harm other people or things, like all of that's important, right? And it's important to be in our feelings and to understand our feelings. And it's also important to have grit, right? To be able to, right?
Oh, there you go.
Right. And it's a balance of those things, right? And that story that you're saying, it's like, oh, so many people grew up with like the suck it up, just, don't let it show, don't, right? Like all of that. And how can we have both? And I think both can exist, right? It's not one or the other. It's about both.
Vicki, how can someone get a hold of you, especially some of these schools? How can they get a hold of you to work with you and, help their students learn how to communicate and participate in the world in a different way?
Yeah, the best way is to reach out to us on our website, which is soulshoppe.org, which is SOULSHOPPE.org. You can check out all of our programs there. The couple of books that we also talked about, the Free to Be, Going Beyond Bullying, is there, as well as the Empty Balloon book. And especially the balloon book is a great book to talk to kids with, or read with kids, or read within your family, or for yourself, for a better understanding of how our emotional balloons really work. So that's the way to get a hold of us.
Vicki, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me today. I so appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Okay. And you have a great day.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
Thanks.